Hello, everybody. We will be giving it a couple seconds here just to let our audience field populate. And I'm going to actually start screen sharing as well while we are waiting here. There we go. Looks like we are still increasing a little bit, so I'm going to let that go for just a little bit longer and let people join in. Okay. Hello, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. My name is Jenny Sitchell, and I am the Operations Director at the National Council on Independent Living. I help coordinate logistics for these events, and I wanted to once again welcome you all to our latest webinar on non-traditional transitions. Today's presentation is brought to you by the Administration for Community Living at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in conjunction with the ILNet. And so I just wanted to give you a brief on myself. My pronouns are she, her. Oh, sorry, in collaboration with the ILNet. I missed a sentence. The ILNet is operated by ILRU and also in collaboration with Nickel, April, and the University of Montana. Giving you a brief on myself, my pronouns are she and her, and I am a white female with dark brown hair pulled back into a ponytail. I have on a maroon sweater and a yellow scarf. So to go over a few housekeeping details, captions are available on this webinar. You can click Show Subtitle in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. We also have captions running at AI Media, but the URL is a little too long to read. So we will share it in the chat box when I am done with this opening. AI Media will allow you to enlarge the font and change the color and contrast of the captioning. Additionally, ASL interpreters are present today and should always be visible as we are presenting in gallery view. Please let us know in the chat if you cannot see the interpreters. In addition to ASL today, we will also have Spanish translation available. In order to access that, you can go to your Zoom bar, click on Interpretation, and you can either choose English or Spanish as the interpretation. You do not need to be on Zoom video to access this webinar, as we will read all slide content and all questions out loud so that everything will be available to individuals calling in on the phone or who cannot see the visual content. I have actually turned off the public chat right now, but you will still be able to send chat messages to the host and panelists. We do ask that you reserve the chat for requests for technical support only. Please do not use the panelist chat to submit content questions for the presenters. If you do want to submit content questions, you are welcome to submit them throughout the webinar in the Q&A tab below via email to me at Jenny, Jenny, @ncil.org, or push *9 if you are calling in from the telephone, and I will unmute you and allow you to ask your question. Although we do ask that if you are speaking a question, you limit the question to no more than 30 seconds. All of the questions will be answered. You can submit them anytime, but we will be answering them at the end of the webinar during the Q&A portion to allow time for all of our presenters to give their information. So, what will we learn today? We are hoping that by the end of this session, you will be able to describe a broader understanding of institutional settings related to transition and diversion, identify possible partnerships for increased transition services in your catchment area, and describe strategies to capture services that should be identified as transition. We also have an evaluation survey that is going to be extremely important to us for you to complete. It takes about 30 seconds, well, maybe a minute, but it really helps us in the long run to optimize these webinars for everybody. So the survey link we will be posting in the chat throughout the webinar, and I'll also be reminding you all of the survey throughout the webinar. Additionally, when you close out, it will pop up to make it easily accessible for you to fill out. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists today. I'm going to go through all the panelists and then we'll get started with the presentation. Our first panelist is going to be Sharif Brown, who is Program Manager for State Reentry at the Alliance of Disability Advocates. Coming up next is going to be Betzaida, I always mispronounce her name, Ramos. She is the Directora Ejecutiva at Mavi. I'm going to mess that up if I try to pronounce her full organization. So I will let her do that. Marley Saade, PCA Program Coordinator at the Center for Disability Empowerment, and Susan Hetrick, the Executive Director at the Center for Disability Empowerment. And then our final presenter will be Jeff Hughes, Executive Director at Progressive Independence. So to get started, I am going to welcome to the screen Sharif Brown and hand it over to him. Your floor, Sharif.
Well, thank you, Jenny, and thank you everyone that is on the panel and everyone else that is attending this webinar. For those that want a description, I am an African-American male. I have a blue kufi, black glasses, full beard. I use he, him acronyms, so that's pretty much my spiel. So let's get it going. So the agency that I work for is called Alliance of Disability Advocates. We are a center for independent living located in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we service Wake County, Johnson County, Orange, Franklin, and Johnston counties in North Carolina. And we're also in a collaborative with the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities, but we'll get more into that as we go along. Next slide, please. That's just a picture of me doing work. There's nothing really special about that one. So who is ADA? Like I alluded to earlier, we are a center for independent living located in Raleigh. For those who don't know what a CIL or a Center for Independent Living is, we are a federally funded agency that specializes in giving free services to any individual that has any disability. We do not require any medical documentation. We just require that the participant or consumer, as what we call our participants, self-identify that they have a disability. They don't even have to tell us what it is. And that's all the eligibility that we require in order for them to receive our services for free. Next slide, please, Jenny. So these are the 5. Okay, so some of the requirements for a CIL: 51% of the staff must have a disability. 51% of the board must also have a disability. All of the programs and services that we offer are consumer controlled. So that means that our participants are in 100% control of their program. We're just here to help assist. And as I alluded earlier, no medical documentation, and that the consumer or the client must self-identify with having a disability. Next slide, please. So these are some of the 5 core services that are mandated by a CIL, which is what we must do. Jenny? So we do information and referral services. So anybody across the state and across other states as well will contact the agency looking for information or resources specifically designated and targeted for the population that we serve. So if we cannot provide that resource within the agency, we have a voluminous list of resources to where we can actually outsource that referral. We do independent living skills training. So that is essentially helping anyone with any independent living barrier that does not require the removing of clothing. So you can be anything from shopping to budgeting to learning how to clean to travel training, which is riding the bus system, the fixed route system, to job resume writing, to cover letter writing. The gamut just goes on and on, as long as it does not require the removing of any clothing. That we will never touch. So because we have a 51% ratio in staff and in board that has to have a disability, we're able to offer peer support. And a lot of times we can offer cross-disability peer support, as a number of our staff have multiple disabilities. We do systems and individual advocacy. So we empower our participants to be self-advocates for themselves. And if we receive any kind of legislation that does not coincide with our belief on independent living, we will boycott. And obviously, while we're here, is transitional services, which is considered youth, anything from a group home, and obviously transitions from an institution, which is what I do. Next slide, please, Jenny. So these are the two types of institutional transitions. We do transitions from an institution, and we do institutional diversion. Long story short, because there's a lot of words there, so long story short, anyone that wants to do a transition from a group home or a nursing home or a correctional institution back into society, that's considered institutional transition. Anyone that is in the community already, that wants to stay in the community and does not want to return to that institutional setting, then that's institutional diversion. So those are the two forms of transitional services that we offer at ADA. Next slide, please, Jenny. So this is why we do transitional services. Obviously, one, it's required by the feds. We do data collection. We are interested in demographic information. We are interested in service provided, obviously goals achieved, lives impacted and changed, and obviously the main point is to reduce recidivism as much as we possibly can. Next slide, please, Jenny. So these are why successful reentry plans, why individual plans are successful. And as you can see in the bold graphic there, 75% of justice-involved individuals will find themselves back into the criminal justice system within 1 year. So it expresses a need for programs like ours that we're going to get into when it comes to reentry. But this is why we're doing what we're doing. Next slide, please, Jenny. So this is the importance of an individualized reentry plan. So ADA, we implement the independent living philosophy with all the services that we offer, obviously. This is vital with reentry as well. Transitioning back into community life from any incarceration, as we all know, is challenging. The challenge increases in difficulty exponentially as the time of incarceration and availability of knowledge or resources decreases. So essentially what we've noticed is that many reentry programs in prisons are cookie cut or blanket style due to the ratio of social workers to individuals being released, which is usually about a 45-to-1 ratio, and that's the low end. So obviously with that kind of a caseload, you're not going to be able to provide independent, individualized reentry services because the caseload is just too big. So obviously for any individual that is being released without any kind of viable resource, more than likely they're going to reoffend, and that goes completely against what ADA reentry is about. Next slide, please. So during COVID, we got a CARES funding from the government for about $337,000. And what we decided to do with that was to combat homelessness, especially when it came to individuals that were being released from prison for conditional releases. So for those that don't know, when COVID hit, when COVID ran rapid in the prisons, for those individuals that were on nonviolent crimes or were coming towards the end of their sentence, they were doing conditional releases. And the condition was, we're going to open the gate and let you out without any kind of reentry plan, which obviously is detrimental. So what the agency did to combat that is that we put people up in extended stays, hotels for months on end to try to combat that homelessness. And while they were there, we were able to find them a more viable long-term housing resource. So Spectrum News did a story about us and the reentry program when it came to what we were doing with COVID, and the link there is at the bottom. I'm pretty sure you'll get access to all the links once the slideshow's over. Next slide, please. So this is a big slide. I'm just going to tell you what the IRP process is. So IRP stands for Individualized Reentry Plan. So what the agency does is that we go in and we meet with the individual prior to their release. And instead of sitting down and trying to dictate what we think they need for their reentry, what we do is we empower them to make decisions on their own reentry. And we ask them what resources and benefits and services they think they need for their success. And then we link them to those resources prior to their release. So once they are released from incarceration, they have a clear plan and understanding about what they need to do and what they want to do. So once we match them to anything, and it can be anything from housing to vocational opportunities, therapeutic and mental health services, vital records, SSI or SSDI benefits, SNAP, which is EBT for those individuals that are applicable, peer support in the community, post-release supports for reentry. These are all the things that we link them to prior to their release. And once we construct the IRP, we hand deliver it to the participant that's incarcerated so they can review the IRP and let us know if it meets their satisfaction. Next slide, please. So these are some of the resources I alluded to for the IRP, and these are just some. We do housing, employment. We have a successful closet at the agency, and what that is that before COVID, every time that Joseph A. Banks or Men's Warehouse did a suit drive, we would receive those suits and we would press them and clean them and have them available for free for any individual that was either enrolled in the reentry program or needed business casual attire to help them with their job interviews. And we still actually have a number of suits at the agency. So we have linked individuals to food pantry resources, as I alluded to, benefits. We do independent living skills trainings. We have a free individualized GED training program with Duke University, to where their master's degree level students are actually doing virtual or in-person independent one-on-one trainings with individuals to train them for their GED. And once their training is done, the agency then pays for their GED testing. So this is all encompassed within the reentry program. And as I alluded to earlier, we do mental health, peer support, vital records, post-release if they're in our catchment area, and also SNAP information. Next slide, please. So this is the history of ADA reentry. We started doing reentry at Butner Federal Compound, which is a federal prison in North Carolina that has 5 prisons in one on the actual compound, leveling, changing from the highest levels of security to the minimum level. And from 2016 until now, we have officially helped individuals with their reentry at about a 98% success rate within the first 2 years. So we've helped over 200 individuals from Butner and only had 2 people reoffend in the first 2 years of their release. So it was this model that attracted the DD Council to ADA and offered us an opportunity for a 3-year grant to do the same thing on a state level, specifically targeting the IDD population. Next slide, please. So this is Adrian. Adrian was actually my first reentry consumer at Butner Federal Compound, and he did 20 years of incarceration. Obviously because of poor choices, environmental forces and things like that, that go in hand with the urbanized area. But he did 20 years of incarceration. He enrolled in my ADA reentry program. And as you can see at the bottom, currently right now, he's the director of operations at another SIL. So it just goes to show you that if you give an individual a legitimate opportunity and give them the resources, great things like this can happen. Next slide, please. So these are some of the outcomes that we have in under our grant with the DD Council. To date, we received 155 pre-release IRP referrals. We've completed 151. And even with the raging and active still pandemic, we're operating at an 87% success rate right now. And that's even with just being allowed to get back into the prisons April of 2022. So for 2 years, we couldn't get into the prisons and do this service the right way, but we still have an 87% success rate. Next slide, please. So these are some of the collaborations that we have. We have a collaboration with the Dunn Rotary Club. We have, like I alluded to, a partnership with Duke University. We have a partnership with the Women's Club in Charlotte that are assisting us with female business casual attire, because obviously we're dealing with male and female participants. We have a connection to the local reentry councils in 3 counties. We have connections to state and federal probation and parole. We have a collaboration with Success While in Transition. The DD Council, Monarch, and FTI 360 are the 2 leading employment service networks in North Carolina. We obviously have a partnership with Butner, and we just signed a partnership with NC State. Next slide, please. So these are some of the stats. According to DPS, 55% of inmates that have a disability have an aftercare plan. So obviously that leaves about 45% of individuals that do not have an aftercare plan. And this is just individuals that actually have a diagnosis. So these are a bunch of individuals that are undiagnosed that have no reentry plan. So even with a state recidivism rate in North Carolina of 47%, the likelihood that a successful transition into society without any kind of reentry services are probably slim to none. Next slide, please. So everybody wants to put dollars and cents on things, so I decided to add this slide. North Carolina spends $52,882 a year for one incarcerated individual. The agency program that we have right now currently operates on $300,000 a year for this program. So if you do the math, if we help 6 people with successful reentry for 1 year, we've met the match for our program to run. And we've assisted since 2017 over 373 people with successful transition. So if you take that 373 and you multiply it by that 52,000, that's how much money the program has saved North Carolina taxpayer dollars. But we still are looking to get that $300,000 a year as the grant ends October of this year. So we're kind of in a tight band. Next slide, please. So this is the team. All that success that I was talking about, I know you probably thought it was about 20 people. It's only 3 of us. Wayne is the gentleman in the middle. James is at the bottom. Both of them are certified peer support specialists. James is a certified RAP facilitator with actually lived experience of being incarcerated, which allows us to offer that peer support, which is so vital when it comes to reentry. But this is how we're currently constructed, only 3 of us. Next slide, please. So in closing, obviously, whether it's education, transitional housing, substance abuse treatment, building any kind of cognitive or emotional resources, we recognize at ADA that independent reentry plans are vital to success to reduce recidivism. We obviously are funded by donations, grants, and volunteer hours. And as I alluded to earlier, the agency continues to search for a funder for this program as a grant expires in 2023. And I just saw that actually my first consumer, Adrian Boone, is actually in attendance. So Salam alaikum to you, and this is what we're doing. Next slide, please. So this is our contact information. We're on the left. We're on 3725 National Drive in Raleigh. And like I alluded to, we have a partnership with the DD Council. So that's their information there. Feel free to contact them and see what we're doing in North Carolina. Next slide, please. I think that might be the last one. This is what we're doing. We're preparing for the next chapter, as I alluded to, trying to find funding for the agency to keep this program going, and hopefully we can get that 300,000 that we're looking for. Next slide, please. And these are the links that I alluded to earlier. We did a Spectrum news story. I did a presentation with NAMI about this same reentry program. I did a prior presentation with the IRLU about why other SILs should be doing what we're doing. Adrian Boone's his stories on YouTube, that's the link to his. I did a webinar with the DD Council, that's their stuff. And then Fox Health News did an article on the program last year, and that's the link to their article. So I know it's a lot, but I thank you everybody for your time and your attention, and hopefully a lot of good things can come out of this webinar. So I appreciate you guys from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharif. That was amazing. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Betzaida Ramos. Betzaida, if you can give me 1 second, I'm actually going to add you as a spotlight. There you go. Okay, and take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sharif, for that awesome presentation, and a big, big applause to all the work that you guys are doing. That's absolutely awesome. So as Jenny said, my name is Betzaida Ramos. I am the executive director of MAVI. In Spanish, it's Movimiento para el Alcance de Vida Independiente. We are an independent living center on one of 2 independent living centers on the island of Puerto Rico. And we provide services all across the island and the U.S. Virgin Islands as well. So for purposes of describing myself, I am a Hispanic woman. I have white skin. My hair is blondish, kind of shoulder length. I have glasses on and some hoop earrings, and I go by the pronouns of she. So I'm going to be with you guys talking a little bit of our experience with regard to transition services during disasters and how this causes the displacement of people with disabilities. Next slide, please. So many of you have probably heard this phrase. It's a citation from the United Nations that establishes that people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to suffer injury or death after disasters. Just this week, EE News released some census data that states that if we look at the general adult population, approximately 1% of adults are usually forced to evacuate their homes after a disaster. However, when we look at people with disabilities, that same data set establishes that approximately 31% of people that can't care for themselves are forced to evacuate, whereas 21% of blind people are forced to evacuate. So when we compare that 1% for the general population and we compare it to this 31% of people that can't care for themselves or 21% of blind people, the disparity is significant. And the saddest part of it is that most of those people that are forced to evacuate may never return. Furthermore, these people are more likely, they are 5 to 10 times, have 5 to 10 times a greater probability of confronting different problems that are what will ultimately not allow them to return home. Examples of these problems: lack of food, lack of water, lack of housing, lack of power, worsening medical conditions, etc. And this is usually a result of them being separated from their support systems, being uprooted from their communities, which will ultimately have them end up in institutions. And the National Council on Disability did a very extensive research on this problem, and they published a report in 2017 called The Prevention of Institutionalization. And I recommend you all look into that so you can see the profound effect that these disasters will have with people with disabilities. Next slide, please. So many of you are asking, so what does this have to do with transition services, which is why we're here. So as Sharif mentioned, as part of the services independent living centers are required to offer, one of those core services are transition. And transition in terms of the deinstitutionalization of people with disabilities, or diversion or preventive efforts of institutionalization. So during disasters, it's usually very improbable that we will be looking at deinstitutionalization, but there's an very increased likelihood of working with the prevention of institutionalization because of all of these factors, because there's a lack of the supports we mentioned, there's a lack of accessible shelters, and like I mentioned before, medical complications that will eventually have people end up in hospitals or requiring more intensive care. Next slide, please. So once the disaster takes place and people with disabilities are forced into these shelters, which is usually the first place you go to, the go-to response, the first thing that oftentimes emergency personnel or people working in shelters will try to do to get the person into an alternative housing placement is they'll probably think, let's put them into a home, let's put them into an institution. And this may not necessarily be because of bad intentions on their behalf. It's because they're emergency personnel that are trained to get solutions quick to the greatest amount of people in the fastest way possible. And oftentimes they'll think they'll get better care. It'll be less taxing on the government and the emergency staff. And sometimes it's just a lack of knowledge. It's because they don't know what other options there are available for people with disabilities once they arrive into these shelter settings. So what do we do? How can we, as independent living centers or disability-led organizations, what can we do while offering this transition service to ensure or prevent the institutionalization of people with disabilities? Next slide, please. So our experience and our experience comes from personal experience that we lived after Hurricane Maria in 2017. Then we had earthquakes on the island. Then we had the pandemic. Just last year, we had Hurricane Fiona as well. So we've had to live through a lot of different natural disasters. And in the course of these almost 6 years, what have we learned throughout this process? First of all, and this is a message we carry across often, we have to help people with disabilities understand that they are the first responders that are responsible for their own well-being. So we need to help them become better prepared. We need to help them develop their emergency plans that will ensure that they have a clear path or a clear course of action available to them if a disaster is approaching or if an earthquake occurs, etc. So that emergency plan, they need to decide, where will I go to? Am I staying at home? Who will support me while I'm staying at home? Will I relocate to a shelter? Let me look beforehand and see where the accessible shelters in my community are. By law, every shelter should be accessible. Experience tells us that they are not. So therefore, people with disabilities need to plan ahead. We need to help them plan ahead to identify what resources are available to them and what alternatives besides shelters, whether it be other friends, family members, what are alternative housing options for them once the disaster does take place. Other strategies that we've helped not only will we train the person with the disability, we will also train emergency personnel. Emergency response personnel, these people, my hats go out to them. They risk their lives on a daily basis, and they want to do everything they can to help people survive disasters. However, they don't necessarily know how to deal or manage emergency situations for people with disabilities. So let's help them. Let's give them the information. Let's provide the knowledge they need to understand all the particularities that people with disabilities need to be considered in emergency situations. And let's teach them that the return to home planning process, once a shelter is opened, when you're dealing with people with disabilities, you can't wait for 1 week before the shelter is about to close, because the process is usually more complicated. You need to think about accessible, physical accessibility. You need to think about transportation accessibility, etc. So this process is going to take a lot longer. So once you identify, once the person with the disability steps into that shelter, you should be thinking as to whether that person will be able to return home or not. If not, what do they need? What are the alternative housing options available? And as CIL staff, as volunteers in this whole emergency response process, we should help them. We should be there to help them find more integrated settings, community-based settings, and help them also identify who are the people that you have in the shelter that are at risk of being entered into an institution, and how can we work to prevent that. Also, during this process, we should be working with our local NGOs, as well as CAGs, the core advisory groups, which are emergency group coordinations between independent living centers, nonprofits, private organizations that work together to help people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. Also, be aware of what the resources are in your communities. Are there other community-based organizations that deal with people with disabilities? How can they help with regard to providing supplies, with regard to providing housing, with regard to finding medical resources that can help the person with disability prevent any more complications and ensure that they can go back or into a new integrated accessible community setting after the disaster. Next slide, please. And also, when we're looking at these transition services and we're looking at these post-disaster situations, we should keep a close eye out on three factors. First, be aware of non-local residents or with disabilities or tourists that may be stuck in your locality during the disaster. During Fiona, we had a very sad case of a woman who was in vacation on Puerto Rico. She was a resident of Missouri. She got stuck here smack in the middle of Hurricane Fiona, and she ended up in a shelter. She was a deaf woman. And unfortunately, that shelter did not have sign language interpreters to help her understand. First of all, she didn't speak much Spanish. And second, she was deaf, and she was at a shelter that didn't have the sign language interpreter she needed to help her through the whole recovery process. So this woman's frustration started building up. And at one point, she got agitated in the shelter, and the shelter employees made her leave the shelter. She was not allowed entry into the shelter. So this woman had no family where she was at. She had no money. She was homeless for days, trying to figure out how someone could help her get back home. Luckily for us, there were some good Samaritans in that community. She actually stayed close to a police station because she feared for her safety. So she was sleeping close to that police station until some good Samaritans identified her, called us as an independent living center, and we started working with the ombudsman for people with disabilities. But this was just obstacle after obstacle after obstacle to get this woman the services and the supports that she needed to get home. She just wanted to go back home. So eventually we had to recur to private donations in order to get her the money she needed to get her ticket and get her back home, coordinate with agencies on the mainland to help her once she got there to make sure she made a successful transition back into her home when she arrived. But this was just one that came to our attention. How many hundreds or thousands, dozens, 100,000 other people go through this situation? So let's see how we can become aware of the probability of tourists being affected by these situations as well, and them needing our services. And finally, we should look out for, just as the case of this woman who was a deaf woman with disability, but also people with cognitive disabilities who don't necessarily understand the whole process. What's going on? What am I supposed to do to get the resources that I need in order to overcome this disaster? So these people require a lot of additional support from us, from independent living centers, from community organizations, so that we can make sure that they don't end up in institutions, which is one of our mandates as independent living centers. So I think that's my last slide. Can you please verify for me, Jenny? Yeah, and again, I mean, the disaster doesn't end just because the storm passed. So it might take days, it might take weeks, it might take years for some of the elements to be restored, as we have lived and seen here in Puerto Rico. So it's especially essential for us to assist our consumers, our people with disabilities, to ensure that they can return home as soon as possible with the less interruption and complications possible. So that's my presentation till here.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting, and a view that we often don't think about when we think about transitions. So next we're gonna go on to Marley Saade and Susan Hetrick. I'm gonna have you both turn on your cameras, and I'm going to add spotlights for you. And Betzaida, we got it. And Susan, let me add a spotlight. Okay, and Marley and Susan, I will let you guys take it over.
Sorry about that, I was still muted. Thank you very much, Jenny, I appreciate you. And I'm going to get started. So first, I would like to clarify that my role with the Center for Disability Empowerment has changed. I'm no longer the PCA program coordinator. I am now the healthcare outreach coordinator for the center, and we are in Columbus, Ohio. We serve Franklin, Delaware, Licking, and Union counties. My pronouns are she and her. And my description is that I am a Middle Eastern woman with curly hair. I'm wearing red lipstick currently. I have a white shirt on with a blue sweater. And today I'm going to tell you about some of the most successful events and or services that we've had with the Center for Disability Empowerment. And my executive director is going to take the other half of it. First, I'm going to speak on the Free to Bless Facebook group that we created for our housing transitions individuals. So anyone leaving long-term care facilities or are actually dealing with houselessness. Anyone in those two areas could reach out to CDE for housing services. And part of that includes the Free to Bless Facebook page, which has 230 members. The group is entirely dedicated to collecting and donating clothing, houseware, furniture, cleaning supplies, hygiene supplies, absolutely anything that anyone could possibly need to get started in a new home. our group members are either willing to purchase or donate lightly used items. In that same group is how the transition coordinator gets volunteers to help with recruiting members, as well as to pick up and drop off the gently used items. This type of service is pretty cool because we don't necessarily have a loan closet at CDE, nor do we have a space to hold any kind of equipment. So this enables us to still provide donations and provide people with equipment or furniture that they might need to start furnishing their home, to feel more comfortable, to be able to cook and clean and cook the foods that they want, clean however they want, create new relationships, find jobs potentially if that is something they're interested in. But everything starts with having a place to put your head down at night. So that's been a huge success when it comes to our housing transition services. And I wanted to share that with you all today. We also have an emergency readiness grant that was offered by Ohio State, our Ohio Statewide Independent Living Council. And in that emergency grant, we hosted 10 webinars geared to supporting people with neurological disabilities to plan, prepare, and practice for emergency situations. Topics for those webinars included politics of emergency readiness, intersectionality and emergency readiness. We had FEMA, we had Red Cross providing presentations. We also had an active shooter provide one 3-part series on how to plan for such an emergency, either in school or in the public. We also had service animals as well as pets for your service animal webinar for pets during an emergency. The grant was actually one that provided some funding, and it occurred right around the time that the state shutdown occurred. So I was able to take all of those funds and actually purchase emergency readiness supplies for individuals with disabilities. Some of those supplies actually included fireproof, waterproof document bag, a large supply bag for their go bag, as well as first aid and medical kits. We had a grabber, we had a yoga mat, we had actually even a bag for your service animals so that they can carry their own supplies, which everybody got a kick out of. And the reason why I did that is because a lot of people with disabilities, we're accustomed to planning ahead, but having an emergency plan is one more area of life that we must think about to eliminate potential barriers. I know it might sound silly that I purchase people yoga mats, but yoga mats can be used in a shelter either to sleep on if there are no beds. If the beds are not necessarily safe for your skin, you can throw the yoga mat on the mattress and that adds an extra layer of protection. If you are a wheelchair user like myself, the yoga mat could be folded and it could be used as a cushion. It could be thrown down on the ground should there be debris and you're afraid of stepping over glass. There's a lot of ways that you could use the yoga mat to your advantage. So I was really excited about thinking creatively on what type of items we could purchase people that would be beneficial to them. Another one I really enjoyed purchasing is a long handle flashlight to be used as a weapon. It's not classified as a weapon, so you don't have to worry about it having it on hand, but it's also a good defense should you find yourself in a situation where you need to defend yourself. So yoga mats are not expensive. They're $15 now and could be used in a variety of ways. So thinking creatively on what kind of supplies you might need in an emergency was very exciting and very fun to do with the consumers. And they enjoyed it as well. We also recently were granted the Disability Vaccine Access Opportunity Center grant. And this is a grant from the CDC Foundation and ILRU. In that grant, we worked with the Ohio Department of Health and their provider company. We hosted over 10 vaccine clinics within Franklin, Delaware, Licking, and Union counties. And we also promoted our services to other vendor events and tabling events like block parties. We did the Fiery Food Truck Festival, the All Disabilities Festival, the Buddy Walk, and others. All of our vaccine clinics were barrier-free. We had mobile units with ramps and lifts, so all of our people were able to get on the bus and get their vaccine privately. We also had ESL and ASL translation services on hand available. And we also had a couple of leftover emergency readiness supply bags. So I included those as raffle prizes for anyone who signed up to get vaccinated with CDE. And this has been pretty cool because it kind of propelled us to create more partnerships. And one of those new partnerships includes the Ohio Department of Health and the Nysonger Center. And that partnership is called the Ohio Disability and Health Program. And what's really cool, it was $25,000, and I purchased enough supplies for 40 community members. Sorry, I lost my track. We are working with the Ohio, with the Nysonger Center called the Ohio Disability and Health Program. And that program is really cool because we're promoting the linkages program. And what that is a referral service. Anyone with a disability who's looking for medical services that are accessible in the way that you need them can call us, and we can provide a referral for medical facilities that meet their disability related needs. So if we know that one facility does not provide very good American Sign Language or English American Sign Language interpreters, then we wouldn't refer them there. We would send them to the right person, right agency or facility. And another objective of that project, which I'm very much excited about, is a survey that we are building for people with disabilities to complete about their medical facilities. And this is every medical facility that you possibly step into. We want to know about the accessibility features so that then we can include it into the linkages database, which is the referral service that we offer, and provide a more accurate list of medical facilities that do offer accessibility related, that are accessible to people with disabilities. So that's pretty cool in the sense that it could help minimize health risks. You can be set for, it's just a good service to apply. I'm losing track of my thoughts. I'm very sorry, guys. But if we can get individuals with disabilities to complete the survey, it'll allow us to have a better idea of what medical facilities are accessible, and those that are not accessible, then we can follow up with and actually do some systems advocacy behind the scenes to help them become more accessible and inclusive to individuals with disabilities. And I think I'm going to let Sue take it over from here. I'm sorry for babbling so much, guys.
Jenny, how are we doing on time for our part?
Sorry, I wasn't expecting you to call on me. I had many windows up. We are good. You can about 5-6 minutes.
Okay.
And then we'll hand it over to Jeff.
Sure, I can do that.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Hetrick. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Disability Empowerment located in Columbus, Ohio. Marley gave a brief introduction to who we are and what we do. I apologize again that we don't have slides. I am a 60-something woman with graying hair, white woman. I have black rimmed glasses, a gray sweater on today, and my pronouns are she and her. I want to go a little bit on the fringes of what CILs usually do. Obviously, we're consumer driven and our focus is on, of course, individuals with disabilities. But like it or not, families are gatekeepers often, particularly for children. And rather than going toe to toe with them, opposing them, we have chosen another route to kind of bring them into the fold with some of the things we're doing. As gatekeepers, we know that they are often the proponents of placement in institutional settings for their children and adult children. We've been challenged by them in legislative testimony and other places, obviously, as I'm sure that you have for those placements. So when an opportunity came to us for a grant from the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities, called the Ohio Family Network, initially I said, no, that's not our focus area. And I did think twice about it. The focus of that grant was to empower individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, particularly, and their families towards more independence, to healthier living, to being part of the community and an integral part of the community. So we latched onto that, and we're now in our third year of working with the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities to that end. We started the grant right when COVID started. So our grand plans for in-person trainings and seminars and support were thrown out the window, like you've all experienced. We went to all virtual. And what we found was that there was more participation on behalf of families and individuals with disabilities because we were virtual, that they didn't have to travel, particularly in the rural areas. So we offered workshops and seminars. When we've done hundreds of them in the last 3 years, we have hundreds of people who have attended and participated. The focus was on developing advocacy skills, communication skills, addressing safety in the community, nutrition, health, healthcare, rights and responsibilities, special education, best practices. One component that we also started under the umbrella of that grant was a leadership academy. We model it after the Minnesota Developmental Disabilities Program called Partners in Policymaking, if you're familiar. And that brings in families and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to go through. Ours was a 9-month course. It exposed and challenged people to challenge themselves about what they thought about independent living, what they thought about the possibilities. It exposed them to best practices in the area of special education and housing and employment, and thinking out of the box for those things. So we've offered all those, wildly popular. It also exposed people along the way to people who, to the independent living philosophy. Often parents are not exposed to that, why we think the way we do, why we are consumer driven. So it gives them those opportunities. We're planting the seeds for the expectation of independence and community membership. We have launched an inclusive communities initiative. If you're familiar with Al Condalusi, he speaks a lot on the topics of social isolation, community building, and capacity building. So we had him for webinars, a series of 5. Those were attended by over 500 people with disabilities and community members, community leaders, because we believe that we can teach advocacy skills. We can talk about independent living all day long. But if the community is not prepared to embrace that, that our challenge is even greater than it normally would be. So we are actually working with communities on being more inclusive and disability friendly, not just physical access, but where people go to socialize, where they go to be entertained, all of that. And we know that the whole issue of social isolation can be a big driver of people going into institutionalized care. So those are just highlights. If you'd like to know more about that, feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan and Marley. And so next we are going to have our next presenter, Jeff Hughes, come onto the screen. And I just want to confirm that the Spanish translation is working right now. Yes, it is. Beautiful. Love it. Okay, Jeff, all you.
Hello there. As I put my hearing aids in, So my name is Jeff Hughes. I'm the Director of Progressive Independence in Norman, Oklahoma. I am 57 years old. I am sporting today a myriad of sport teams. You can see in the background, possibly that I have a Boston Red Sox background. I have a San Francisco Giants ball cap on, and I am wearing a Edmonton Oilers sweatshirt, and you can't see them, but I am also wearing Pittsburgh Steelers sweats. So I'm going to talk to you about a new project that we are beginning to undertake here in Oklahoma. And that's one reason that I couldn't really provide any slides to this point, because we don't have anything really concrete yet, this is just now formulating, getting going, utilizing a Medicaid managed care company, Centene Corporation, which I'm very excited about. To kind of give you an idea on the framework of Oklahoma and its Medicaid system, individuals, young people between the ages of 18 and 21 that do not have a cognitive impairment do not receive any waivered services at all. The only services that are provided to young people are state plan services. And unfortunately, we call that here Sooner Care. And unfortunately, no home modifications are provided. And it's incredibly difficult to get assistive technology and DME equipment as well through state plan services. The target population that we're going to be working with on this new program, and of course, we've brought all kinds of complaints and discussions and meetings with everybody and their dog, as you can imagine, about the holes within our systems here. And hopefully we'll see some legal action here before long. As you might be aware, Oklahoma Department of Justice has already been here once, that to meet with the Department of Mental Health, because of how people with mental health challenges are being forced into the legal system and being held in jails. So there's more to come on that. But going back to our project, which is to specifically work with young people who have disabilities within that age bracket, 18-21, within the foster care system. Unfortunately, we've experienced that a lot of younger people have quite a bit. There are quite a few people who have disabilities within that system. And several years ago, I was on the advisory board of Aetna, where I first learned about this project out of Philadelphia to impact the foster care system, and really enjoyed working on that, providing information, trying to provide a independent living twist to that model. And we got to meet the people who were actually started providing the services there in Philadelphia under that program, and one of the participants under it. And that was a way cool project. And now that this is getting started again here in Oklahoma, I'm really excited about how we can stand this up and make this into a really cool project as well. A story that came across my desk here not too long ago was there was a young lady, 18 years old. She was living with her foster mother, and she was over in east of Oklahoma City and in a larger community. And she had just graduated high school. She was wanting to go to college. She had a pretty significant physical disability and used a power wheelchair, needed personal care, needed some skilled nursing. And the applications that were submitted to apply for those types of services was denied by the state. Evidence of need is there. There's no reason that any of that stuff should have been denied. She lived in a house that was incredibly difficult for her to get around in. They needed home mods, but of course, as I mentioned earlier, home mods are not provided under state plan. So she was trying to find some way in which to receive additional supports and services, and so that she could continue with her life, live independently, maybe move out and with personal care, but couldn't even get that started because yet another thing that's not really being offered under state plan services. So when Centene came to us and said, you know, we want to really kind of build around this population, utilizing the centers in the core services in particular, and then maybe some other services if we can get them going. So the focus was going to be, of course, with our traditional core services of INR, the peer support, skills training, enrolling within health plans or other programs that they might be able to benefit from. Any type of diversion services and supports we will be providing, or transitioning to and from. We will absolutely be providing with that. As I mentioned with the Living Well program, we've offered the Living Well project out for the one out of Montana. We've been offering it for several years, and of course, it is a very long, intensive project, and we require people who receive support or assistance from us for moving from an institution into the community. We require people to go through this 10-week course so that we can be sure that we're working with them in money management, learning how to manage their PCA, advocating for themselves. Everything that you can imagine is thrown into that 10-week course. We don't always make it go 10 weeks. We try to shorten it up. We'll probably try and do 2 or 3 weeks, in one week. So in other words, we might do three trainings in a week. So we don't have to keep people hanging on forever. But that's been very well received. And one of the really good stories that we had come from that was that there was a lady who was homeless in Norman, and we helped her out, get her into a new apartment, and helped her with getting her car fixed and some other things. And then she went through our Living Well program, and then went through our training for being a personal care assistant. And she went to work after going through that. She went to work as one of the aides for several of our consumers. So that was a really good story that we were real excited about, seeing how that played out. She is still working. We've been working with her. She's been doing that now for about 2 years. And she was a person who was directly impacted by COVID, and real excited about that. So we'll also be identifying any other in accessible homes if people need it, accessible apartments. We'll be helping with the home mods when needed. And as everybody knows, of course, the accessibility issues that you might find within some of the units that have been constructed vary from, very minimally accessible to sometimes, I mean, not very often that you run into one that has optimum accessibility, but we want to make sure that we can build in accessibility to the degree that an individual can even do things like cooking, making sure that they can get up under stoves, making sure that the oven is at the right height, making sure that an island is accessible, they can do the dishes, things like that, and reduce the reliance on personal care services. We want to encourage people to participate more and more in their daily living. Another new project that will be starting up here probably before long surrounds healthy living and food injustice issues. We will be working with companies like HelloFresh, and as we get closer in another presentation, I'd love to come back and provide some more information about that. That is going to be a way cool program. We'll be reaching into areas within historically unserved areas within Oklahoma City, northern side of Oklahoma City, where there is only maybe one grocery store within 10 to 15-mile radius. So the access to food, good, fresh vegetables, meats, very limited. And especially when you get into the rural areas, it is even more so. So I'm excited about that project as we get that stood up and going. We will also, of course, be encouraging and facilitating access to more equipment, such as better wheelchairs, DME equipment, and other types of assistive technology, and coordination and collaboration. We will be working with DD Council, of course. Our PNA is going to have some really good responsibilities with us. The Parent Training Information Centers will be working with us as well. Folk Rehab, I'm not so sure about. There's some really strange stuff going on in Oklahoma VR right now. There's more, I'll be sharing some more information about that here before long, because it looks like our governor has gone off the deep end. Medicaid agency, of course, we will be working with them, and our Department of Human Services, who normally administers our waivers. I'm not sure about how much degree we'll be working with them, because they're kind of the wild card out there that may or may not have any role in this. The Client Assistance Program, and our big partner is our Sister Center and Ability Resources in Tulsa. So this is a real exciting project that I'm excited about. So as this continues to roll on, and as we get things more details and more information about how and the numbers of people that we're serving and all of this, I'd be happy to share that information with everyone. So I appreciate the time. I think that I'm spot on time now, Jenny. It is over to you.
I love it. I love staying on schedule. So just as a reminder to people, we're going to get into questions and discussion now, but please take a second or two to fill out our evaluation survey, which the lovely Sharon Finney just put in the chat box. So it will also pop up when you close out of the webinar. So we have a bunch of questions for everybody. This first one is for Sharif. And this is Jason asking, how do you know who has a disability in prisons, and how do you know that they're about to be released? So I will have you. Yep, you got it.
Well, that's a great question. Essentially, when it comes to the prison, we go based upon what their determination is. So, like anything, well, since we're consumer controlled, like I said, what the prisons do is that they have their own caseload of individuals that have already been diagnosed with having disabilities. And essentially, what they do is that they let them know about the program, and then they decide that they want to sign up for the program, and then we get the referral. So we already know about their disability when we get the referral. Now, keep in mind, this is pre-COVID when we did not have access to the prisons. Now that we have access to the prisons, we're going into the prison ourselves and finding out the needs and the wants of these participants. But prior to that, we had to use the social workers as our liaison for the referrals. So every social worker has their own caseload that breaks down every single person that has a disability that's being released in the next 90 days, I believe. And then based upon that, that's when we start getting referrals. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to have you stay on, Sharif. I see that you are driving, so please be careful. But what type of disabilities do you serve? Do you serve all of them? Are there any specific ones, anything like that?
We serve any disability as a requirement of ASL. So any disability we serve. When it comes to specifically the grants that we're operating under, those individuals have to have an IDD diagnosis as a baseline, but they can have any kind of disability on top of that. So the federal side of it, the Part C side, is any disability, and the state side, the way that is currently structured, which we have plans on changing if we can find the funding, they're specifically an IDD population. So federal side, any disability, DD grant or state reentry has to have an IDD diagnosis.
And what types do you normally see? Like, do you have a major type that you often see? Just to clarify a little bit on the question, Sharif.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? They're kind of low on my end.
Yeah, what type of disabilities do you normally see that come through your program?
As far as disabilities that we see everyone that you can possibly imagine. The majority of the population that we've been dealing with have had a mental health diagnosis, as you can imagine, coming out of incarceration, how mental health is deterred and on a downslide. So we deal with a lot of individuals that have a mental health diagnosis, but we've seen visual impairment. We've had individuals that go into prison without a disability, that have obtained a disability coming out of prison, whatever that looks like, whether it's a mobility issue, which 9 times out of 10, that's what it usually is, because unfortunately, a lot of people get accidents, and unfortunately, a lot of inmate facilities. So we see the whole gamut that every disability you can possibly imagine, we've seen and we've dealt with.
Great, thank you so much. And the next question is for Betzaida. And this is Kira asking, or Kira says, a group of us disability advocates in Illinois had drafted and helped pass legislation to create an access and functional needs advisory committee within our state's emergency management agency. We are tasked with recommending revisions for both state and local emergency management plans to ensure our needs are met during emergencies and disasters. The topic and issues that you discussed very much relate to concerns that they also want to address there in Illinois. So Kira is wondering, what language, inclusive strategies, and/or considerations do you think they should include in these plans to help divert people from being unnecessarily institutionalized after evacuation?
Thank you, Jenny. So Kira, first of all, congratulations on getting that opportunity to form that committee. That's often the first step to get the ball rolling, to actually get the changes needed and in this whole emergency management process. So my first recommendation would be make sure you have a formal collaborative agreement in writing that will ensure the permanence of your committee, because oftentimes we have this merry-go-round of politicians who are often, yay, I love this idea, and then they'll leave, and then someone else will come in, and maybe you won't be able to provide continuity because they don't see it as such a great idea. So the first thing would be make sure you get your agreement in writing. And in that agreement, ensure that as part of the process, you're going to be part of emergency operations centers and shelters so that you can actually get in to these facilities when the emergency actually strikes. That'll give you access, direct access to the people in charge of making decisions. It'll get you faster access to maybe resources, whether human resources or fiscal resources that you might need to be able to provide people with disabilities in order to remain within their community setting. And it'll just get people, that emergency management staff, accustomed to knowing there are disability experts. There are people that we will go to during this whole process if we encounter someone in the shelter or someone who's homeless or whatever that has a disability and needs our help. When looking at those emergency plans, and we can talk about this later, there are documented areas where emergency plans tend to fail. Notification process, evacuation processes, communication process, the sheltering process. So look at the literature and maybe just create sort of like a template or a guide as to these things that you're going to look at when you're reviewing these emergency plans, so you can ensure standard revision and you won't miss anything when you're actually looking in at them and making your revisions. Try to be part of the shelter inspection process when they go in and actually determine whether the shelters are accessible or not. That's a key factor to ensuring that the person can go into a safe setting beyond what family and friends can usually provide. And if in that written formal agreement, you can determine resources that you're going to have access to, because we have the best intentions when we're dealing with all these emergency processes, but we often need funds. Where are we going to get the supplies? Where are we going to get funding for maybe someone that'll help you with the data entry processes or the database to identify your people with disabilities in the communities, etc. So you're going to need resources. So try to fight and ensure that you can get some resources for all the work you guys are going to be doing for this process. And I mean, we can go on and on and on and talk about this. So my email is in the presentation, and we can definitely talk a lot more about this.
Thank you so much. And so we have one question left. Jeff actually had to hop off, but our final question is for Sharif. One last one for you, Sharif. And Amy wanted to know, how hard was it for your SIL to get clearance to go into the prison?
Believe it or not, the federal prison wasn't that difficult. Obviously, in any kind of an institutional setting, especially when it comes to prison, the warden and the assistant wardens are obviously going to have to screen whatever kind of programs and things like that that you're trying to implement in their facility. Most prisons do not have a problem with volunteers coming in to assist. So there wasn't too much pushback on that. Now, understand that there are certain levels of security, especially like in Butner, that I can't even get access to. Like they have a medical wing that's there called the FMC, and that is like is where all the cancer patients and mental health, like severe mental health, suicide watch, things like that. That kind of clearance we couldn't even get into. So it all depends on the level of clearance. But on the state level, because we already had a contract already in place with DPS. Us getting into the 13 state prisons, we were already contracted to get into. So the only barrier that we had was COVID. COVID essentially was the hardest barrier with us getting into the prison system. And because DPS has been backing the program, they literally really pushed the wardens to allow us to get back into the prisons to be able to fully implement this initiative. So without DPS backing us up, it might have been a real difficult situation.
And do you, yeah, we have time for one more question. Do you work with both male and female prisons? And or the aging prison population, Sharif?
Yes, we work with male and female prisons. They're both under our contract. We work with the aging population, because unfortunately, especially when it comes to federal incarceration, a lot of people do long stretches, 20, 30, 40 years of incarceration. So we work with them as well. There's not anybody that we're going to turn down for assistance if they have, and they self-identify that they have a disability. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter the location that they're being released to. Because even when we're working in North Carolina, on a federal level, we have people that are being released across the 50 continental United States. So I've done independent reentry plans for people that were going all the way to Alaska, all the way down to Puerto Rico. So we've pretty much encompassed the whole continental United States, and we take any population, like I alluded to, as long as they have a disability and as long as they self-identify that they have one, and that's all they need for us.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we are just about out of time. So I wanted to just give a big thank you to our panelists for joining us, and everybody that is on the call for joining the call. And I also just want to remind everybody to fill out the survey and evaluation, and that will really help us to make these better and more inclusive in the future. So thank you everybody so much, and have a great rest of your day.